Good afternoon. This is Wilfred Owen's exposure analysis. This poem was set in World War I. It makes reference to the cold winter of 1917. Wilfred Owen's poetry was shocking and realistic. It stood in contrast to both public perception of war and patriotic and romantic poetry of the early war. In this poem, Owen depicts the fate of soldiers who perished from hypothermia as they were exposed to horrific conditions of open trench warfare before dawn. The death took long, both in psychological and physical space and time. So the soldiers develop boredom and delusional state that they have to handle. The topic of this poem is the futility of war and nature as an enemy, and Owen's purpose is to make the reader take the place of a soldier in this context and get to build a mental and sensitive point of view based on a soldier that is fighting in the war. The futility of war and nature as an enemy is portrayed in exposure through the use of personification, assonance, rhyme, imagery, and religious reference. There are three main topics that I'm going to develop. First, how the real enemy in war is nature or nature's elements. How war can kill a man in a psychological, if not a physical way. And how war can lead to a loss of faith in God, or how God is responsible for the suffering caused by nature. First, how the real enemy is nature in war. In general, in the poem, the author explores how he is subjected to a constant danger because of the climate. So in the first stanza, we can see this from the very first verse, when he makes reference to the merciless east winds that knife us. In here, this personification suggests that the wind is vindictive and it doesn't have compassion for them. He uses knife, which is a violent verb, and this implies that it is an attacker. So from the outset, the personality that is established to the weather is as an enemy. So from the very first verse of the poem, Owen presents the weather as an enemy. In this same quote, there is a hissing of the S, a sibilant hissing of the S, and it is combined with hard consonants like D and T, and this creates a cutting edge, like the sound of a knife cutting, like sharp knife. So it makes reference to this knifing of the men. In the second stanza, there's more use of personification. In the first verse, we hear the mad gusts tugging on the wire. It suggests that the wind is mad. It has anger, and due to this anger, the wind may be also like a possible attacker, as portrayed before. In the second verse of this stanza, I quote, like twitching agonies of men among its brambles. Owen uses a simile of it. It makes a horrific image that wind is causing the barbed wire to twitch like a dying man. So this also creates this alludes to the senses of the reader, making the reader portray and imagine the sounds of the barbed wires twitching. In the third stanza, Owen uses again personification, talking about dawn massing in the east, her melancholy army attacks once more in ranks on shivering ranks of grey. Here, Owen personifies the dawn as a weary female war commander. This army of clouds is similar to the German army, as it is similar to the uniforms, gray and you could say stormy. It's also like lined up in rank upon shivering ranks. So it is ready to attack. In the fourth stanza, now he again uses personification. Flakes that flock, pause, and renew the wind's nonchalance. Here, the snowflakes appear to make conscious decisions about where they will settle, meaning they have a decision of whom they will attack, in this case, the soldiers, and also the giving of human characteristics to the wind, as its nonchalance in the face of mass suffering and its apathy or concern for their suffering. In the fifth stanza, again, he uses personification. Pale flakes with lingering stealth come feeling for our faces, giving again the snowflakes human characteristics. In this case, giving them fingers, which feel for the faces of the men, making them like feel that pain, and also like making the snowflakes capable of inflicting the pain to the faces of the soldiers due to the cold. So collectively, the personified like wintry elements are portrayed as an enemy on the attack, as much as dangerous as the Germans in this case. The next topic is how war can kill a man in a psychological way, or if not physical. So first, in the third stanza, Owen uses assonance in the first and second verse. He uses the O sound. We to grow, we only know where last in rain soaks. So this O sound draws out the painful process of awakening. This emphasizes like the mood of the narrative of the moment done by Owen. And additional to this, he uses more personification when he says Dawn, massing in the east her melancholy army. This means that dawn only brings another day of misery. Again, he combines hard consonants to create a bleak atmosphere, and he used attacks once more in ranks of shivering ranks of grey. In the fourth stanza, making reference to the personification mentioned before for the previous topic, this personification shows how these soldiers have had like a psychological decadence, that they have gotten to a point to attribute human qualities to things and to the weather specifically. And here he uses sibilance again to create fear and to portray this fear that the soldiers have on their minds, in order for the reader to relate to that, due to the whispering of loneliness and solitude. In the fifth stanza, Owen uses a beautiful image of like an ideal place of where the soldiers would want to hide or be, in order to hide the reality. So this happens in the fifth stanza. In the third and fourth verse, I quote, "So we drowse, sun dozed, littered with blossoms, trickling where the blackbird fusses." Now, inside of this quote, there is also a use of assonance, of consonants, where the repetition of the S represents the wind hidden behind that ideal reality. So again, the personification of the elements, of the natural elements, represent the psychological decadence of the soldiers. Um, in the sixth stanza, Owen portrays basically how the soldiers are forgotten and abandoned by the ones back in England. Um, and here he basically means that their homes are empty, and this letting down of the soldiers brings them down psychologically and make them want to escape in a different way. In the last verses of several stanzas, he says, "But nothing happens." This represents the stillness of the battle they're going through, the stillness of the mental battle they're going through, and this leads us to the third topic, that is how war can lead to a loss of faith in God, and how God is responsible for the suffering caused by nature. So basically, this is shown in this seventh and eighth stanza, where he says, "For God's invincible spring our love is made afraid." So the spring that God will make follow this winter frightens the soldiers, as they feel they won't be able to be alive, to see it, to live it. In the fifth stanza of this, in the fifth verse of this stanza, he says, "For love of God seems dying." So God's love for them is in doubt. They're putting their faith in him, like is tumbling, as like parallel to their faith and in how the war was going to develop. So there is this relationship between their faith in God and their faith in, like, yeah, like this nationalistic feeling and patriotic feeling they had for the war. And then in the eighth stanza, he says, "Tonight his frost will fasten to this mud and us, shriveling many hands and puckering foreheads crisp. The burying party, picks and shovels in the shaking grasp, pause over half-known faces. All their eyes are eyes." So in here, when he says his, he makes reference to God and how he will freeze everything, and his seeming indifference, like how it harms the soldiers more than the actual wounds caused by the battles, like the bullets and the guns. And still, here in the fifth stanza, in the fifth verse of the eighth stanza, sorry, he says again, "But nothing happens," making reference that all this sacrifice, like Christ-like sacrifices that the soldiers are making, are not having any results. So this means that the futility of war and nature as an enemy is portrayed in exposure through the use of personification, assonance, rhyme, imagery, and religious reference. Through this, Owen creates in the reader the image. He portrays the image of reality, the reality of war, to the reader, and therefore he gets to connect his style of poetry with criticizing the abandonment of the English people and of God for them, and leaving them in